And welcome again, everybody, for joining us this evening or whatever time of day it might be for you. So tonight we'll be focusing on the climate and environmental policy programming that we have at Vermont Law and Graduate School. And tonight, that really means is showcasing the strengths of our Maverick Lloyd School for the Environment. Got a number of panelists here that are joining me tonight from both the admissions department and then the Maverick Lloyd School for the Environment. We'll start us off by having Dean Jenny Rushlow provide us really a look into what climate and environmental policy looks like right now. And you can take it away. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So I think the way we're going to run this is I'm going to give kind of an introductory mini lecture on climate and environmental policy, a sense of the stakes of where we're at right now, and some examples of what doing that work in the field looks like. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ann Linehan, who will talk about our degrees that focus in climate and environmental policy areas. And we'll give some more specific information about those degrees. And then we'll have an opportunity to hear from a current student, and we'll have some Q&A. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Lauren, please. So to kick things off, I'm sure it is no surprise to you that we are facing a climate crisis. We have global annual temperature data going back to 1880, and temperatures have increased by a little more than about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in that time. 9 of the warmest years since 1880 have occurred since 2005. And the 5 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2015. Next slide. And of course, the effects of climate change are immense. And how we talk about the effects of climate change may be different, depend on who we're talking to. That's one of the skills that we learn in advocacy is selecting how to drive home your message. I've picked one of the many impacts, which is economic impacts here. And you can see how the economic impacts are extensive but varied throughout the country. There are even some examples of economic benefits of certain kinds. For instance, you can see in the Northwest region, in some cases, there may be increased agricultural yields, but you can also see that the costs to the economy from climate change are substantially more overwhelming than the benefits and will be widespread. And that's in the United States. If we could go to the next slide, we'll take a look at the global impacts. So this is a Bloomberg graph, and this shows what the change in gross domestic product per capita will be by 2100 compared to a world without climate change. And as you can see, the global south is pretty much universally very negatively impacted in terms of their economies as a result of climate change. Some of the colder regions may be positively impacted for, along the lines of the example I just gave. But by and large, most of the world will be negatively impacted, and most of the most vulnerable economies will be impacted the most. Next slide. This is another visual demonstrating what we've come to understand as the unequal burden of climate change across the world. So this shows the relative contributions of a country to global fossil fuel emissions relative to the economic impacts that they will suffer as a result of heat waves. And you can see that on average, the income change at the bottom of the graph, where the income is going down, are for those places where people are actually contributing the least to the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change. And so not only is it these vulnerable countries that will feel the impact the most, but it's not their fault that climate change is happening, and yet the brunt falls on them. Next slide. You can't really see what it says in the corner there, but this is a photograph of the tar sands mining in Alberta, Canada, related to the Keystone XL pipeline. And so I provide this as an example of, this is a project for mining tar sands, which is a very heavy petroleum product. It's used for different kinds of gasoline and petroleum fuels. It gets refined into different kinds of products. It gets transported from Canada via 1,700 miles of pipelines all the way down to Texas. And this mining that you see here is on Indigenous lands in Canada. And this mining and the pipelines that would carry these tar sands cross sacred Indigenous waterways and wetlands, habitat for 20 rare and endangered species. It crosses drinking water aquifers. And because the fuel is so heavy, as I just described, when it spills, it's incredibly damaging. It is nearly impossible to clean up. And there have been examples of spills from tar sands pipelines like this and the damage that it has done to communities. So there's environmental damages, and then there's also climate change impacts, because the burning of tar sands for fuel emits higher levels of greenhouse gas emissions than conventional oil. And as a result of all of this, there was an enormous amount of opposition to this project. And actually, the Keystone XL part of the pipeline was killed after a great deal of lawyering and policy advocacy and community organizing. That part of the pipeline was killed over a period of decades. There is a portion of the Keystone pipeline that does exist, but the extension that would have come with XL was stopped using the kind of tools that you would learn about in a degree like the degrees we're talking about today. Next slide. So I mentioned the tar sands pipeline and where it started. This is a little video that shows where the pipeline was going, and I'll just set it up for a moment before we show it. This is a picture of Port Arthur, Texas, and this is a destination for where oil gets refined. This is where many of us in the United States get our oil and gas. In Texas, 12% of the population statewide is African American. But in this specific area, the residents around these hazardous waste sites, it's made up of 60% people of color, and 66%. This community right here is an African American community called the Carver Terrace Public Housing. And the residents that live in this public housing site do not benefit economically from the refineries that you see surrounding this housing development. Now, the video that you're about to see was posted on YouTube by a local activist, and it shows 8 towers surrounding the housing development that are spewing smoke over West Port Arthur. And why don't we go ahead and show the clip?
April the 14th, 2013. Time now about 10:30 a.m.
Thank you. So again, that's a video just taken by a community resident on their phone on what should have been just any normal morning. What had happened that led to that was there was a brief power outage at a substation owned by Entergy Texas, which is a local power provider. And after that outage, they needed to restart. And when they restart after a blackout event like that, refineries have to flare off huge quantities of extra toxic emissions. And that flaring goes on for more than an hour. And as you can see, the sky turned dark at 10:30 a.m. And this is not an unusual event. Cancer rates among African Americans in this county are 15% higher than they are for the average Texan. And I show this because, as you can see, this petroleum product pipeline starts in Canada, harming Indigenous communities, gets piped all the way across the country, and harms communities of color on the opposite side. And then ultimately, when these products that are being produced here in Port Arthur from the petroleum products, they cause even more harm. So this slide we're looking at here, the map actually compares the exposure of nitrogen dioxide pollution, not a greenhouse gas, but what we'd call a co-pollutant, an air pollutant that's emitted alongside carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions from coal plants and places like that. And the map uses what's called the Atkinson Index of Income Inequality. And it's a way of measuring how evenly or unevenly something is distributed across a population relative to income. So a score of 0 here, or pink, would indicate that everyone in that place is equally exposed to nitrogen dioxide air pollution, regardless of their income. And areas in red, the higher scores, indicate worse inequality, where people are exposed to carbon dioxide more the less money they make. And as you can see, there's a lot of red on that map. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So that was the depressing part of the presentation. I'm going to shift now to talking about what people who want to change this do, and how we find reason for hope, and what are the tools we use on a day-to-day basis to do that. I teach a class at Vermont Law and Graduate School called Climate Change and the Law. And on the first day of class, I have a few slides on mental health and climate change advocacy, because climate anxiety is real. But there are reasons for hope, including, and this is from a survey, a national survey data set of more than 28,000 individuals. And this was published by Yale, showing that the majority of adults surveyed support action on climate policy. And I know it may not feel like it if you follow the news much, but what happens in Washington is not always necessarily reflective of the general population. Perhaps if more people voted, we could move in the right direction on that. But people do want to see change on climate policy. There is that appetite. And so there is reason to believe that we will move in the right direction if we continue to be better and smarter advocates with smarter and deeper information to share. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about 2 examples from my own career of the types of climate advocacy that you might do with a graduate degree in climate and environmental policy, for instance. So just to give a little bit of background, I have a JD and a master's. I have a master's in public health. I got my 2 degrees concurrently in Boston. And coming out of graduate school, I was really passionate about wanting to work on environmental justice. That's what really got me into all of this in the first place. My first job out of graduate school was at a law firm, where I did kind of classic environmental and land use law. My next job was at Conservation Law Foundation, which is what I'm going to focus on here. And I was at CLF until I came to Vermont Law and Graduate School, based in Boston. And they're kind of a classic environmental law and policy advocacy organization. They're a New England region-wide organization, so kind of a regional analog to national organizations that you've probably heard of, like Natural Resources Defense Council or Sierra Club or Earth Justice, things like that. And while I was there, I worked on a whole bunch of different issues: climate change, clean energy, agriculture, environmental justice, many things that I cared about. And one of the things that was really fun about that job is that I got to use both my JD and my master's skills. And what I'm going to focus on today are the parts of that job on a couple of campaigns I worked on that you could do with a master's degree. You know, I did litigation and other things that I needed a JD to do, but I also did policy advocacy that I could have done with a master's degree only. And I worked with many colleagues at other organizations, you know, in coalitions that had policy master's degrees and were able to do the same kinds of policy advocacy I was doing. So first, I'm going to start with the Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act, and second, I'm going to talk about electric vehicle policy in Massachusetts, and then I will wrap it up. So next slide, please. So the Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act is the climate law in Massachusetts that was passed in 2008. It was a very big deal when it got passed. Massachusetts was only the second state in the country to have a economy-wide greenhouse gas emission reduction law, second only to California. And it was a wonderful thing when it got passed. The unfortunate thing is, as is often the case, the legislature delegated authority for the next steps of actually implementing the law to the executive branch, which was Governor Deval Patrick at the time, and his agency, the Department of Environmental Protection. And they were supposed to adopt regulations that actually translated this big optimistic law into enforceable greenhouse gas emission reduction requirements for individual polluters. And they didn't do that. And so without that, the GWSA, the Global Warming Solutions Act, was sort of just a pretty thing on paper. It wasn't actually going to result in the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that it promised. So we sued the state, we being Conservation Law Foundation and a number of other organizations, and we were successful. That's a shorter version of a long battle. And then on the other side of that, we advocated to actually get the agency to adopt the kind of regulations they were supposed to do. So what I'm going to do is just give you a very quick overview of that process and point out the places where policy advocacy was happening. Next slide. So just to give you a very brief taste of the more like technical side of being a policy advocate or a lawyer, everything that we did in this advocacy depended on this one sentence, this one subpart of the legislation, which required that the department, meaning the Department of Environmental Protection, shall promulgate or adopt regulations establishing a desired level of declining annual aggregate emission limits for sources or categories of sources that emit greenhouse gas emissions. So the reality of doing policy and legal work is that you spend a lot of time looking at word jumbles like that and needing to figure out what each word should mean, what you'd like it to mean, what the legislator thought it meant when they passed it, and then arguing with each other about who's right about what it should mean. But this was the origin of our argument that the department had to pass regulations that told people how much they could pollute, and that those pollution amounts had to go down each year, and they didn't do that. Next slide. So what do you do when the government has this mandate to actually do the right thing and they haven't done it? Well, what we did is first we asked the agency to adopt the regulations. We sat down, had a conversation, said, this is how we interpret the law. How do you interpret it? And what's your plan? And tried to, come to an understanding that made sense. That didn't work. So we tried a little stronger advocacy in trying to persuade the agency to take action. That didn't work. So we filed a notice of intent indicating that we were willing to sue the agency if they didn't pass the regulations. And then we actually filed the lawsuit. And so those first two pieces of the advocacy leading up to the lawsuit, that was policy work. That was working with an agency, trying to help them shape policy in the right direction. We could have been a resource to the agency in actually drafting regulations. We could have helped bring stakeholders together to shape the regulations in a way that would have been really effective and possibly even well liked by the advocacy community. That didn't work, and we needed a stronger hammer, so we sued. Next slide. And the lawsuit part of this, which is the part that you need a JD for, was we plaintiffs sued the defendant, the agency, and essentially asked the court to order the agency to issue the regulations, to say that our interpretation of the law was correct. The agency did have to do these regulations and to order them to do so. Next slide. So again, a very quick overview of a long series of litigation. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, and we were successful, which meant that we had a decision from the court saying, yes, the agency is supposed to do these regulations, has not done so. Agency, you must go forth and do them. So there ends the part that you have to have a JD to do. And then the remainder of the process where we actually got the regulations is, again, all policy advocacy. So, luckily we had showed some muscle through the lawsuit, and the agency really wanted to be talking to us as they were working on the regulations at this point, getting input as they were developing the regulations. So we were meeting with regulators, we were providing public comment, we were working with grass tops and grassroots organizations to give their input as well. Okay, so then I'm just going to talk about one more thing. Next slide, please. And that is another example of policy advocacy that I was involved with while at CLF. And this is focused on electric vehicles. So CLF was involved in regional advocacy in all of the states in New England in trying to bolster adoption of electric vehicles. And that meant trying to promote policies around financial incentives to help people afford EVs. It meant trying to get commitments from the state to install charging infrastructure, things like that. And this was more than 10 years ago. Wow. And so one of the things we did to kick that off is we published a report in partnership with a couple of other organizations, Sierra Club and the Acadia Center, on what the states, utilities, and the auto industry can do to accelerate EV adoption in the Northeast. And we gave, you can see the report there, Charging Up, it's still available online. It was kind of a guidebook to what these stakeholders could do, particularly from a policy standpoint, to move in the right direction. And that's a lot of what policy advocates do, is doing the research, being the expert in what would be a best practice in trying to move forward in a particular area, and then strategically getting that information into the right hands in the right way. And one of the ways in which we went about shaping advocacy in Massachusetts was something that was a little unusual compared to other advocacy I've done, but I'm really proud of it because I think it worked really well, is we organized what we called the Massachusetts Electric Vehicle Roundtable. which was an event, and you can see the agenda here if you're curious, that brought together stakeholders from all of the major offices in state government, from car manufacturers, from car dealerships, from trade associations, to talk about where Massachusetts was on EVs and where it needed to go. And I think we lost Lauren and our slides, but that's okay. I'm sure she'll be back. Okay. That event set the stage for stakeholders to come together and share a perspective on where we needed to go on electric vehicles that didn't exist prior to that event. It kind of created a stage where the state had to answer for what they were doing and not doing, where they were kind of publicly hearing from experts in the field about what they could do to do more. And that was extremely effective and led to the creation of a zero emission vehicle commission in Massachusetts, which was stakeholders appointed by the governor to develop policies to accelerate the adoption of EVs in Massachusetts. And I was on that commission along with many of the other stakeholders that I mentioned that attended that roundtable, and it has led to the adoption of EV tax incentives and charging infrastructure and many of the things we identified in that report that I just showed you. So I hope that helps give you some examples of what this work looks like. I think that it's really fun. It can be technical, and that's why I think getting a degree is an excellent idea. And I'll turn it over to Ann Linehan to talk more about how that works. Ann is the Director of Graduate Programs for the Maverick Lloyd School for the Environment, as well as the Staff Director for the Environmental Law Center. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. Part of my role here at the school is that I'm an academic advisor for students in our different environmental degree programs. So I'm going to chat about 3 of those degrees in particular. So Lauren, if we could have the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a couple of our master's degrees and also about our LLM degree in environmental law. So we have a whole series of different environmental master's degrees, but 2 of those in particular really look at climate and environmental justice and environmental policy. So the master's degrees, you're going to get into some specifically environmental coursework like environmental justice and fundamentals of climate change. But they're also going to give you some real fundamental skills to prepare you to get out and work in the field of public policy and environmental policy. So if you're pursuing these master's degrees, whether it's the Master of Climate and Environmental Policy or the Executive Master of Environmental Policy, you're going to be taking classes like the Legislation and Regulation course, an Introduction to Policy Research and Writing class, a class on policy design, and a couple of classes that might sound a little scary to some of you, like environmental economics and quantitative analysis. But the idea behind all of these is that you're getting the really foundational skills and understanding that you need to be able to be a successful policymaker, policy designer. Part of the degree is a series of required skills modules, and that's going to include things like public participation, negotiation and consensus building, understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, that'll give you kind of a background in environmental justice, climate justice, and then also these policy skills. All right. So I'm sorry that you're looking at my head instead of some slides about the program. But Lauren is having some internet issues where she is, and I can relate because I live in the same town as Lauren and also experience internet challenges. That's part of life in a small town in Vermont. So let me talk a little bit more about the Executive Master of Environmental Policy degree. So that's a new degree that we just started last year. It's offered online only. It's designed for people who already have some professional experience in the environmental field. And then this degree is a chance to really get a credential, get some deeper knowledge in environmental policy. It's exclusively online. It's the shortest of our master's degrees. It's only 25 credits, and the entire degree can be completed in just 4 semesters online. So you're going to have all of the courses that I just talked about and the skills modules that I just talked about, plus some room for environmental electives to customize your program a little bit. And then if that executive master of environmental policy sounded too short to you, not as much, not as in depth as you were hoping for, then we also have the Master of Climate and Environmental Policy. And that degree is, it's a 34 credit degree. It's can be done entirely residentially at our campus here in South Royalton. It can be done entirely online, or you can put together any kind of hybrid version of those two that works for your schedule. And that degree is really, it's designed to give you the professional skills, again, to fight climate change, to fight some of the environmental injustices that Dean Rushlow was talking about in her presentation. If you are interested in climate change, if you're raring to go after hearing what she was talking about, our degrees offer a lot of climate electives, a lot of opportunities to really dig in and learn more about climate law and policy. We have classes on climate change in the law, climate change mitigation, climate and extinction. And we have a class on international environmental law that's going to be, super important to understanding climate change issues, because obviously climate isn't just happening in one country. So it's, it's important to understand international environmental law. If you come to the residential program, we have a couple of additional specialized climate classes. Of course, we have Dean Rushlow's climate change and the law class. We have a class on climate and taxes. A new class that we're excited about on climate justice, and a really special class that's called International Climate Change Law. And students in that class, they spend the fall semester learning about international climate change law, and then at the end of the semester, they travel to the annual COP International Climate Conference. The conference is held in a different country every year. I think this year it's going to be in Azerbaijan. Is that right, Jenny? I think that's where it's going to be. So the students travel to the conference and they work to represent a small island nation, that doesn't have a lot of resources to bring to the conference, and the students work with the representatives from that country and help them at the conference. So they're doing, it's real world, they're making a difference right there while they're taking the class, while they're attending the conference. It's an incredible learning experience. And we're really fortunate that the school has been able to fund the travel expenses for students, because obviously traveling to the places where this conference takes place is not cheap. It's been in Egypt and Dubai, and then this year in Azerbaijan. So it's just been an incredible learning experience for students to really, get a hands-on experience learning and making a difference on climate issues. One of our recent students who did that class last year made some great connections with the government of Palau. That's the country that they were working with. And then she, the next semester, was able to line up an externship working again with the government of Palau. It was a remote externship. She wasn't actually traveling to Palau, but she was, getting some more experience, building up her resume, and again, really getting to make a difference to help this country. So those are some of the climate electives. We have our environmental curriculum is huge. We have close to 60 different environmental classes across our residential and online program. So I highlighted some of the ones focused on climate change because that's what we're talking about this evening. But we just have a vast array, way more classes than you could ever dream of taking, and you can really build yourself your own little specialty from the huge array of courses that we have. But I just focused on some of the climate focused ones. As a master's degree student, if you're pursuing the Master of Climate and Environmental Policy, you have the opportunity. Oh, look at that! We've got the slideshow. There you go. There are some of those climate classes that I was talking about. So if you're pursuing the Master of Climate and Environmental Policy degree, you have the opportunity to pursue a thesis if that's something that you're interested in, and really get into the scholarly side of things. If you're interested in perhaps eventually getting published at some point, a thesis can be a great way to go. You get to choose the topic and work with a faculty member. I was talking recently with one of our current master's students who's pursuing a thesis this spring, and he's really excited because he's working closely with a faculty member. He's also working with the staff of an outside organization. He's working on food resilience topics, and so he's getting to work with a nonprofit organization and with faculty members to really delve into this topic that he's passionate about for his thesis. If we could look at the next slide. If a thesis is not your scene, the other track that students choose is a practice track. And with the practice track, you're getting hands-on practical experience, whether that's through an externship off campus for credit towards your master's degree or working in one of our many on-campus clinics. The clinics, they're doing real work for real clients. And we've got a whole range of different clinics on campus that our students can participate in. The environmental advocacy clinic is more of a traditional litigation clinic. Environmental justice clinic. I should have said not environmental advocacy clinic. And they're working on a lot of the issues that Dean Rushlow was talking about at the beginning of her presentation. A lot of the disparate impacts of climate change on the populations that have done the least to cause the problem. I mean, those are some of the types of issues that you'd be working on in the environmental justice clinic. The energy clinic, obviously they're also doing some work related to climate issues. They focus a lot on community solar projects for low-income communities, for mobile home communities. So just, lots of different interesting hands-on opportunities through our clinics if you choose the practice track. Let's look at the next slide. And this is just an example of some recent careers that our master's grads have gone on to pursue. You can see a big range of different kinds of policy work. Our grads go on to work in the private sector for environmental nonprofits, for state or federal government agencies. So just, a really big range, and it's going to, which direction you go in your career is going to depend to some extent on the experience that you have coming in and what sort of issues you focus on, what kind of experience you get as a student. We have one of the counselors in our career services office works specifically with our master's students. That's all she does is work with master's students, and she works with students right from the start, before the start, actually. She'll meet with every student to talk about what their career goals are, where they want to be geographically, and what they're interested in. And the program, you can take up to 5 years to finish, but for most students, it's a year to a year and a half, which goes by pretty quickly. And so we really want students to be thinking right from the start, what their career goals are, and really help you get there. Okay, I think we've also got some people here tonight who are interested in LLM in environmental law. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. So an LLM, for those of you who aren't familiar with that degree, an LLM is a post JD degree. So you have to have earned either a JD degree or the international equivalent of a JD degree in order to pursue an LLM. At Vermont Law and Graduate School, we offer a number of different LLM degrees. The one of interest this evening is the LLM in environmental law. There are LLMs in all kinds of fields. I think probably tax law is the most common one that you'll find around the country, but there's even an LLM in fashion law that I've heard about. So there are all kinds of specializations, but no surprise, here at our school, most of the ones that we have are focused on environmental issues, including the LLM in environmental law. It can be completed 100% residentially, 100% online, or you can put together a hybrid version. It's a 30 credit degree. Every LLM student takes the LLM graduate seminar. And I think that's a highlight of the program for a lot of our LLM students. It tends to be a pretty international bunch in that program. And so the LLM seminar it's a small class, and the students really, in addition to scholarly research and that sort of thing, they're also just getting to know each other and hearing about, how environmental law works in all of their different home countries. So, learning from each other in that class. The clinics that I just talked about for master's students, that same array of clinics, is available to LLM students. There's the opportunity to do externships. LLM students also have the opportunity to write a thesis or a research project. If that's, again, if you're more along the scholarly side of things, then pursuing a thesis might be appealing. For others, they're pursuing an LLM degree to get more into the environmental litigation side of things. And so in that case, you might want to be pursuing an externship, gaining some experience in that area as part of your degree. So it's a pretty flexible degree depending which direction you're looking to go with it. And speaking of careers, let's take a look at the next slide, and you can see examples there of some of our recent LLM grads and some of the different jobs that they had. And a lot of these are focusing on the climate and environmental justice side of things. So I can see one of the guys, the guy there with the plaid shirt and the red background is BJ Schulte, who worked here at Vermont Law and Graduate School for a while before heading out. He's the one who's at Earth Rights International, and he taught one of our other field study classes for a while, which is a class that goes to Southeast Asia in the summer and looks at environmental issues in developing countries. So just a little sample there of the different types of careers that an LLM might pursue out in the world. All right, the next slide. Oh, there's me and Jenny in greener, lusher days, which we're looking forward to just a few months from now. So there's our contact info. If you have questions for either of us after this session, please feel free to reach out. And now I think I'm going to be handing it over to one of our current students and one of my advisees to talk about her experience in the program, and that's Courtney Moore. So I think we can, turn it over to, so Courtney is currently a student in the Master of Climate and Environmental Policy. So Courtney, why don't you start out by introducing yourself and, where you're from and what brought you to Vermont Law and Graduate School?
Yeah, so my name is Courtney and I'm an MSTEP student. I'm residential and I'm doing the practice track this semester. So I have an externship, not at one of the legal clinics, but off-site at a local planning commission, which is really, really cool. I'm from Farmington, New Mexico, so I came quite a ways away to be here. And I searched far and wide for a place that gave me such a feeling of hope in this environmental catastrophe. I don't know. The very first time I came on campus, there was such a sense of environmentalism, of hope, of a better world, and that is everything that I was looking for. And I made the decision to move my life out here and pursue that.
All right. Well, so you're in your second semester, and is there a course so far that's been your favorite?
It's yeah. I really liked legislation and regulation, just because it gave me a little bit more policy. I was a environmental science major in undergrad and biology minor and business minor, so I really had no political experience at all. So I was very far outside my comfort zone. So just learning about all of the legislations and how to read policy and all of the words that you need to look for was really cool for me to do. I learned so much. And then the other one that I really liked was structural inequality, which was kind of like an environmental justice class where I learned how we as a society have gotten to where we are and how we can go back and retrace our steps and kind of fix some of those things and fix our foundation a little bit.
Right. So since you got here, are you pretty much sticking along the track that you thought you would, or have new ideas captured your attention and sent you in a different direction?
Yeah, I originally came in just broadly caring about the environment. I want to do good for the environment. This is what I want to do. But since I've been here, I really enjoyed my Native American law class. I think that was one of my favorite classes ever. I did grow up 10 minutes from the Navajo Nation reservation, so that's a really cool background of mine. I learned a lot there, but here I learned the environmental injustices that reservations face, and I think that that would be a really good fit for me in the future because I care about that so much. And that's something that I never really expected to do, but that professor and that whole course taught me so much, and I'm thinking of doing that. I don't know. Like, there's so many paths that I could go. It's really still up in the air.
Right. You mentioning that reminds me that after this webinar today, there's a Taste of Culture event happening this evening on campus. And one of the food tables that I know is going to be there that caught my attention is some food representing the Pueblo Nation. And I'm really excited when this is done to run downstairs to the Chase Center and check out that table. But it was fun. I know we're getting a little sidetracked from the climate thing, but just to sort of give everybody a sense of some of the things that go on here on campus, I think that's going to be a really fun event. There's some different cultural presentations and food from there was some like Cuban dancing. There's going to be some food from Spain and Ireland and South Korea. And anyway,
And I forgot to mention this in my introduction, but I'm also the Student Bar Association Master Senator, and I'm part of the Diversity and Equity Committee and also the Finance Committee. But really, the Diversity and Equity Committee is so, so cool because I get to meet people from all over the world, and these are the people that are holding the events that Anne just said. And it's just such a cool experience. Like, I thought I was from far away, but I am getting a taste of so much more than I could have ever hoped for.
right. On that note, what are some of your favorite things about the VLGS community?
I think just being surrounded by so many people that have such a true, unwavering sense of hope for the environment. They care about the environment. I, again, am from the West. Out there, I was an anomaly almost. I would tell people I'm a fanatic for the environment, and it just wasn't a community that was set up for me to succeed in. And while those communities can thrive, I needed a place where I could be surrounded by true environmentalists so that I could learn from them and get hope from them and then carry that knowledge out into the world. And all of the people here hold such similar values to me that I know I'm going to keep those relationships for years and years to come.
It's great to hear. I know my admissions colleagues here would love for me to ask you what advice you would share for prospective students who are thinking about one of our programs.
I think the biggest piece of advice is that you don't have to do it all. I think it can be very, very overwhelming when you're choosing a new master's degree or thinking about the climate crisis in general. But I hope you know that there is only so much you can do and that every little piece matters. I like to think of it as big bag of rice, and I spilled the bag of rice, and looking at it initially, it's a lot to pick up and I'm really annoyed and I don't want to do it. But every little piece, suddenly you keep putting it back in the bag and then it's done, you know? So I just hope that everyone knows that they can make a difference no matter how small.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Courtney. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we turn to
I was going to
questions?
ask Courtney a
Yeah.
quick question, and sorry about that. And if anybody wants to type a question in the Q&A, that would be great, or we can try and manage the chat. We have about 5 minutes, but Courtney, are you going to go back to New Mexico? Where are you going to go? I mean, you have the whole world.
I know, the world is my oyster. I don't know. I came here for this environmental knowledge, but I almost feel like I'm doing the world a disservice by staying here. If I did, just because there are such true environmentalists here, I would love to bring environmentalists out west and share my knowledge out there. I think there's a lot to learn from the Eastern United States and how we've set up Vermont's government. Like, it's nothing against the state. I love it here, but I did my undergrad on the western slope of Colorado, and there are some pretty big fish to fry over there. So I'm thinking I might go to Denver after this.
All right. Well, Katie,
Um,
Lauren, do you want to toss us any questions from the audience?
Let's
There's
see.
a big question, and my internet
Yeah,
is finally allowing me to
Yeah, are
join
you
you
gonna
guys again. So
I
sorry.
know. Welcome back, Lauren.
Thank you guys for taking the reins. It sounds like there's a question kind of about what are some overarching goals of environmental policy and the advocates that are trying to move that forward. If anyone's feeling like maybe they can tie that up in a few minutes for us.
Sorry, which question are you referring to? The most recent one?
Yeah, it sounds like they're interested in learning more about environmental policy and what advocates what your goals would be as an advocate in that space. It is a pretty broad
Yeah. And
question.
he goes a little deeper about food costs and how to like agriculture concerns and how you can make a positive impact in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is to figure out who the decision makers are and who they'll listen to and what will be persuasive to them, right? So, I know there's a lot of environmental issues in Georgia and that they're very different from the ones we have in Vermont, for example. It's I know there's also a lot of NGOs doing great work in the space. So, you know, before you get a degree, I think linking up with people who are embedded in that space already at some of the advocacy NGOs and asking how a citizen can make a difference and if there's any campaigns they have that you could plug into. Certainly that's something you could do now. But you know, I think there's so much impact that people can have in states like Georgia by becoming educated in the tools that you need to influence policymakers. So, you know, it's a broad question, so I'll give a broad answer, but I think there's a lot you can do.
Dean Rushlow, one of our alums, came from Pennsylvania, and activist. And after she finished her program here, I said, are you happy that you came and you learned policy? And she was so amazing. She said, I realized I was not pursuing the right people. And that the key was looking at, she said, I was fighting this agency, and it was the wrong agency. And so that was the biggest comeback that she had, was that she learned how to direct where to put her efforts for the most change. And that's why I love, because like we have classes in lobbying, which good thing to know.
Yeah, it's a skill. It takes time to learn.
Wow. Well, we're right at time, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in with us tonight. I want to thank our panelists. Jenny, whenever you break it down like that, it makes it so much more digestible. So I really appreciate you providing that mini lecture for us to just kind of help us understand things better. Courtney, I loved hearing your perspective, and I'm sure all of our prospective students joining in did as well, and a wealth of knowledge. And thank you, Dean Merrill and Veronica and everyone for joining us tonight. And we'll be in touch soon with the recording link. You can join, watch it again, and reach out with any questions. We'll be so glad to talk with you. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.